clock on the wall ticked, its sound strangely louder than usual in the sterile silence of the lavish penthouse. It was just after 2 p.m., the golden hour for the staff to retreat into their routine, a time when the owners were either absent or too busy with meetings to notice the quiet beneath their own world. Yet, despite the bustling quiet, something about the room felt unusually tense. Maria stood in the corner of the grand living room, her back to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Manhattan. The view was impressive, the city stretching endlessly below, a gleaming testament to the success of those who lived above it. She had never gotten used to it. The endless steel and glass towers, the ones that made the rich even richer, the ones that made her own struggle feel almost irrelevant. She adjusted the dust cloth in her hand, its fabric white against her dark blue uniform. She felt the weight of her own insignificance as she watched the latest round of lavish cleaners polish yet another countertop, another piece of gilded furniture, another glittering surface. No one noticed the quiet woman sweeping the corners, far from the gleam of wealth. The echoes of hurried footsteps around her made the walls seem even higher, the shadows longer. She had worked here for 3 years, always at the bottom of the ladder, the one everyone passed without a second glance. But Maria had grown accustomed to this. She wasn't invisible to her own self. Not entirely. She glanced across the room toward the private hallway where her employer, the elusive billionaire Harrison Brooks, would soon return from his regular board meetings. No doubt he would barely acknowledge her, if at all. It was always the same. He never saw her. Just another face among the sea of staff members who made sure his life ran smoothly. His high-end taste was a given. But to Maria, it was just another way of keeping things out of reach. As the dust settled in the air around her, Maria's eyes drifted back toward the small framed photo of a younger Harrison Brooks on the wall. She had dusted it many times but never truly looked at it. The old photograph captured a different man, one who seemed full of hope and promise, eyes wide open to the world. She remembered the rumors from when he'd built his fortune, the dirty politics, the questionable deals, the whispers that trailed him even in the high society circles, a darker side to the story of success. Maria couldn't help but wonder about him, not in any romantic way. No, her curiosity lay in the gaps, in the moments when the walls went up, when his golden smile turned cold in the face of his employees. The cracks in his polished image were visible, even if they were carefully concealed beneath layers of success. Just then, the front door clicked open, the sound breaking the silence like a sudden storm. Maria quickly turned her focus back to the floor beneath her, wiping away the last of the dust. Her heart raced, but not for the reason one might expect. It was not anxiety. It was anticipation. The echoes of footsteps came closer, and she heard his voice. His usual dry tone on the phone, never acknowledging the invisible workers who made sure everything stayed in place. "Get the report ready by 4, he said. "I'll be in my office." Maria remained frozen, the sharp scent of cleaning supplies mixing with the faint trace of cologne in the air. She knew the routine. She'd seen this play out 100 times. She felt the walls closing in. How many times had she imagined that one moment? The one where things changed. The moment when they'd see her for more than just a maid. A soft rustling sound broke her thoughts. A glimmer of something caught her attention. From the hallway, a familiar voice rose, higher than usual, sharper. The housekeeper was speaking in low tones with another staff member. "Did you hear? They're bringing in someone new. They're calling it a secret connection. A business partner, someone big. Haven't seen him around much," the housekeeper muttered, half certain she wouldn't be overheard. Maria stood still, her breath barely a whisper in the vastness of the penthouse. A secret connection. A billionaire's secret. The thought of it triggered a spark deep inside her. A feeling she couldn't quite place but couldn't ignore either. For a fleeting moment, the universe inside the walls of this penthouse felt too small, like a key unlocking a door Maria had never dared open. Footsteps approached again, this time with a sharp, impatient stride. The doors of the elevator opened with a soft chime. She turned toward them instinctively, but it was not Harrison who emerged. Instead, a man walked toward her, Tall, clean-cut, and impossibly sharp in his tailored suit. His presence exuded power, but it was the unfamiliarity that made Maria's heart race. As he passed by her, he gave a slight nod, too casual, too dismissive. But Maria felt something shift. She didn't know who he was, but his presence felt different, weighty, and that was all she needed to know. Maria's mind began to spin, thoughts tumbling over one another. This man, this new addition to Harrison's world, had to be more than just another businessman. The name Brooks had carried rumors with it, but a secret connection, a hidden deal, something deeper than anyone had been let on. She stood there, torn between the desire to go on with her work and the need to understand what was happening. Before she could make her move, the sharp voice of her employer broke through the tension. "Maria, see to the garden, please. The grounds need attention." She nodded, her gaze still lingering on the unfamiliar man who had already disappeared behind the closed doors. Something shifted deep inside her. The mundane, repetitive life she had lived, the one where she was invisible and small, suddenly felt like it was about to change. She turned and walked out the door into the hall, her heart racing. But as she moved toward the gardens, she couldn't shake the feeling that the next chapter of the story had already begun. Not for the billionaire, but for her. Maria stepped out into the crisp air, her breath visible against the cold light of the afternoon. The garden, a patchwork of meticulously pruned trees and sculpted bushes, felt oddly quiet today. It was as though even nature had sensed the change that was creeping its way into the penthouse. A change Maria couldn't yet fully understand. Her hands, usually steady as she worked with the garden's flowers and plants, trembled slightly as she adjusted the pruner. The sudden rush of thoughts was dizzying. The man, the one who had passed by earlier, felt like a sign, a harbinger of something bigger than she had ever imagined. She had worked here for so long, kept her head down, and done her job with little more than the occasional nod or grunt from the higher-ups. But this felt different. There was an energy in the air, a crackling tension that Maria couldn't ignore. She dug the pruner into the soil, her movements automatic, but her mind raced. The secret connection. What did it mean? What was hidden in that cryptic remark? Who was he, and what role did he play in Harrison's world? Maria paused, the pruner still in her hand, her fingers digging into the handle with a white-knuckled grip. Harrison. He was always present in the house, always a distant figure that loomed large but never really connected with those who worked for him. She had seen the arrogance in his eyes, heard the way his words dripped with disdain when he addressed the staff. He was a man who controlled everything around him, and the few times she had spoken directly to him, never more than a couple of sentences, his words had always been cold. Yet there were moments, fleeting as they were, when his mask slipped. She had noticed them over the years. Maria wasn't naive. She knew that people like Harrison Brooks weren't easily understood. His wealth, his influence, it all made him impervious to the world around him. And yet, there was something more to him, something elusive. She had always been curious, always watched from the corners of rooms, trying to piece together the puzzle of a man who was more shadow than substance. But today, it wasn't Harrison who occupied her thoughts. It was the man in the suit, the stranger who had made his way into the penthouse like a ghost, leaving an aura of mystery in his wake. His nod to her, brief but deliberate, had felt different. It wasn't dismissive like the others. It wasn't cold or distant. It was calculated. Maria had noticed the subtle power he exuded. He wasn't just a businessman, he was part of something bigger. Something that might just explain the weight she felt pressing against her chest. As Maria continued her work in the garden, her mind returned to that moment of power. She had been invisible for so long, just another faceless figure in the backdrop of wealthy lives. But today, everything felt shifted, like the universe had just whispered a secret that only she could hear. She had seen how Harrison and his world operated. The riches, the luxury, the air of invincibility. But behind that, Maria had always wondered about the cracks. What would happen if those cracks were exposed? What if the secrets these people hid became known? What if Harrison's perfect world was built on lies, on connections he didn't want anyone to know about? The hum of a distant engine pulled Maria from her thoughts. She looked up to see a black SUV rolling down the driveway toward the penthouse. It was a rare sight for someone who didn't work directly for the family. She wiped her hands on her apron, wondering for the first time in a long while if her intuition was leading her down a road she wasn't ready for. But some undeniable sense, told her that this day, in this quiet garden, was the beginning of something bigger than herself. As the SUV came to a stop, the door opened. To Maria's surprise, it wasn't the elusive stranger stepping out. It was Harrison himself, his tall frame outlined against the sunlight, his hands holding a briefcase. He moved quickly toward the entrance of the penthouse, but not before glancing over his shoulder, as if searching for someone. For a moment, his gaze caught Maria's. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, almost as if he had just seen her for the first time. But that was impossible, right? Maria stood there, frozen in place, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she wasn't imagining things. Harrison had seen her, not as the invisible maid who dusted the corners or trimmed the hedges, but as someone with purpose, someone with value. But what was the purpose? And why now? She turned back toward the garden, pretending to be absorbed in the task at hand, but her mind was elsewhere. The seeds of something new had been planted, something bigger than she could have ever expected. As she finished her work and moved toward the back entrance of the house, the unfamiliar man's words echoed in her mind. A secret connection. That's what they had called him. But Maria knew there was more to it. There had to be. Inside the penthouse, behind the closed doors, Harrison was doing what he did best, holding power over everything and everyone. But somewhere, in the intricate web of his world, Maria was beginning to see a new thread. A thread that could unravel the whole thing. She might be the one to pull it. As she stepped inside, the grand marble floors beneath her feet felt different now, colder somehow. She moved with purpose, no longer the unnoticed maid, but someone who had begun to understand the rhythm of this world. Maria wasn't just the woman cleaning the penthouse anymore. No, she was the one who might just expose its secrets. And with that thought, something inside her clicked. A shift, a change. Her world, once small and invisible, was about to get much bigger. The next few days blurred into one another as Maria's mind raced with the thoughts of the stranger, the secret connection, and the subtle shift she had felt when Harrison Brooks had briefly acknowledged her presence. She hadn't let it show. The tension that gripped her chest every time she worked within the walls of the penthouse. She kept her head down, as she always had, cleaning the polished floors and arranging the fresh flowers that adorned the rooms. But each task felt heavier now, as if the weight of something hidden hung in the air around her. It was late Wednesday when the change first manifested itself. She was in the back kitchen, sorting through the various cleaning supplies when she heard the muffled conversation between two of the butlers. Their voices were low, but in the stillness of the empty house, Maria could catch every word. "Did you hear? They're bringing in someone new. Another business partner for Mr. Brooks," one of the butlers said, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. "Not another one," the other replied with a chuckle. "Every time they bring someone in, it's always someone we're not supposed to know about. What's this one going to be? The next big thing?" Maria's pulse quickened. She stepped closer to the counter, pretending to straighten the silverware, her fingers trembling as she wiped away an invisible smudge. The mention of a business partner piqued her interest, but it was the next big thing that gnawed at her mind. She'd seen these partners before, the ones who would flash through the penthouse with expensive suits and urgent meetings that never involved her. But this felt different. This wasn't about a new deal. It wasn't just another anonymous figure in a sea of faceless millionaires. There was something that felt far more deliberate about the way they spoke. Maria had always kept to herself, but the mention of secrecy, of something being hidden, it resonated too strongly with her instincts. The conversation continued. "Don't be so quick to judge. I heard he's connected. Real money. The kind we don't see around here." Maria's heart skipped a beat. Connected? There it was again, the same phrase from before. She couldn't shake the feeling that this man, the one she had seen in the penthouse the other day, was far more important than anyone was letting on. She stepped away from the kitchen counter and out into the hallway, her mind racing. She had always kept her distance from the complex world of her employers. But today, something had shifted. The secrets that swirled through these walls were no longer just rumors. They were truths just beyond her reach. And somehow, she could feel that she was about to uncover something no one had ever intended for her to know. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Maria stood outside, gathering her thoughts in the small courtyard that separated the penthouse from the city. The air was thick with the smell of fresh-cut grass, and the soft hum of city traffic seemed far away in this hidden garden. She had always found solace here, away from the polished floors and the whispered conversations of those who lived above her. But tonight, the courtyard felt like a prison, a place where the walls closed in and the secrets began to suffocate. The sky was a deep purple as Maria turned to head back inside. But as she did, she saw him again. The stranger, the man who had entered her world with little more than a passing glance, now standing by the gate, as if he were waiting for her. Her heart skipped a beat. It had been days since she'd last seen him, and she hadn't expected him to be here on the property, let alone standing so close. He was different tonight. His suit dark, the collar of his shirt slightly open, his jaw sharp beneath the streetlight that illuminated him. He wasn't the polished billionaire type she had grown used to. He was something else entirely. Someone who seemed to move through these walls unnoticed, yet always watching. Maria paused, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure why he was there, but something told her that his presence was far from coincidental. Maria. His voice cut through the night, smooth and controlled, with a faint edge of something she couldn't place. I hope I'm not disturbing you. She tried to hide her surprise, though it was impossible to ignore the rush of adrenaline that surged through her. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice more steady than she felt. Don't be, he replied, his gaze steady on hers. There was something magnetic in his eyes, an intensity that pulled her in. I was hoping to speak with you. It seems there's more to you than meets the eye. Maria's mind raced. His words weren't a question, but an observation. How did he know? How could he know? Her role in this house had always been so clear-cut, so simple. She was just the maid, the one who swept the floors and kept things in order. But here he was, standing in front of her as if he saw something she herself had never realized. She took a slow step back, unsure of how to react. But before she could gather her thoughts, he spoke again. You've been working here for a while, haven't you? He asked, his tone casual but not entirely devoid of curiosity. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? The glitz, the power. But it doesn't take long to realize how fragile it all is. The ones on top are always looking over their shoulders, always wondering who's going to take it from them. Maria's chest tightened. There was something in his words, something far deeper than mere observation. She felt an involuntary shiver crawl up her spine. It was as though he was offering her a glimpse into a world she'd never been meant to see. A world of power and corruption that didn't just exist in the penthouse but in the very structure that kept people like her invisible. She had to ask, "What do you want from me?" He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that sent another rush of unease through her. "I want you to help me expose something that has been hidden for far too long." Maria didn't know what to think. The stranger, the one who had brushed past her days ago, was now speaking like someone who held the keys to a different world. A world she hadn't been a part of until now. "Help you?" Maria echoed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a maid." The stranger's smile widened, but it wasn't a mocking smile. It was one of understanding, of recognition. "That's exactly why you're the one who can help." Maria's thoughts raced as she watched the stranger. This man whose name she didn't even know, standing before her, speaking in quiet, confident tones. He wasn't demanding anything from her. No threats, no intimidation. Instead, it was as if he were offering a path, one she had never considered, one that stood in stark contrast to the life she had always known. Her fingers tightened around the pruner she had absent-mindedly carried with her from the garden. Her mind, however, was far from the dull routine of trimming hedges or wiping down marble surfaces. For the first time since she had started working in this penthouse, Maria felt a strange pull, a desire to know more. But that desire was fraught with uncertainty. The man stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. His presence was like a weight in the air, not oppressive but demanding in its own way. Maria, you've seen the way the world works here. You've seen the power dynamics, the control, the secrets they think no one notices. The truth is, you've been invisible to them, haven't you? His voice softened with a touch of empathy, but there was a certainty in his words. Maria flinched at the truth of his statement. She had spent years in the background, invisible, unnoticed. She'd PLA. Like Harrison Brooks never saw her. But now, this stranger was offering something different. He wasn't dismissing her. He wasn't treating her like a servant, a nameless face in the sea of the help. He was looking at her, truly looking at her, and it unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, the words leaving her lips more out of reflex than conviction. The man smiled, his expression unfazed. "You don't have to pretend with me, Maria. I know exactly what you've seen. And I know you're not blind to what's happening in this house. You've watched the cracks form in Harrison's perfect world. You've seen the subtle tension, the backdoor deals, the power struggles. You might have thought they were just whispers in the walls, but they're louder than that. And they've always been there. The question is, are you ready to see them?" Her heart thudded painfully against her ribcage. It wasn't the first time she had noticed the cracks. She had seen the strained smiles between Harrison and his partners, heard the hushed conversations in the hallways when they thought no one was around. She had always ignored it, kept her distance, telling herself that it wasn't her place to question. But now, with this stranger standing before her, offering an alternative reality, one where she could actually matter, where she could actually play a role in something larger than her menial tasks, it felt impossible to ignore. The wind picked up again, sending a chill through the courtyard as Maria shivered, unsure if it was the cold or something deeper that was making her feel uneasy. She could feel the weight of the stranger's gaze on her, steady and unwavering. He wasn't giving her an out. He was waiting for her to decide. "Why me?" she asked, finally finding her voice. "Why do you think I can help you? I'm just a maid." "Exactly," he replied with quiet finality. "That's why you're the perfect person. You see things they don't. You're in the spaces they forget to pay attention to. You hear the whispers in the corners. You've seen how they treat people like you, people they think they can control. But you're not like them. You're stronger than that." Maria didn't know what to say. This man, this stranger who knew so much about her life, about the power she had never realized she possessed, was asking her to step into a world that had always seemed out of reach. It was dangerous. It was risky. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something stir deep inside her. Something that longed for change, something that told her this was the moment she had been waiting for. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "What do you want from me?" The man's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. "I want you to be the catalyst. I want you to expose what's happening behind the scenes. Harrison and his partners think they've covered everything up, but they've missed someone. You're the one who can see through the veil they've put up. You're the one who can show the world who they really are. But you have to choose, Maria. Do you want to stay in the background, where it's safe? Or do you want to step into the light and be part of something bigger?" Maria's mind was spinning. She was no longer just the maid, no longer just an invisible presence in the house. The choice he was offering her was a dangerous one, but it was also a chance for freedom. Freedom from being unseen, freedom from being stuck in the role they had given her. She could keep cleaning the floors, tending to the gardens, never questioning the power dynamics around her. Or she could break free, unravel the secrets they had hidden, and make them see her as something more, something powerful. Her pulse quickened as the weight of his words settled over her like a blanket. She had always lived in the shadows, but now, she was standing at the edge of something larger than herself. The question that hung in the air was more than just a decision about Harrison Brooks or his business partner. It was about her future, her power, her place in the world. Maria looked up at the man, her eyes locking with his. For the first time in her life, she felt a spark of something new, a spark of rebellion. She wasn't sure what the next steps would be, or what it would cost her, but one thing was certain. She wasn't invisible anymore. "I'll help you," she said, her voice steady, though her heart was still racing. The man's smile widened, as though he had been waiting for her answer all along. "Good. You've just taken the first step." Maria's heartbeat echoed in her ears as the stranger's words settled over her like a heavy, unseen cloak. "I'll help you." She hadn't realized it when she said it, but the declaration had been more than just a response. It was a commitment, an unwitting promise to herself. A choice that, once made, couldn't be undone. The man's eyes flickered with something almost imperceptible satisfaction. Maybe? Or was it something deeper, something more calculating? His expression softened slightly, as if he had been waiting for that very moment to unfold. And perhaps, in some twisted way, he had. "Good," he said, his voice steady and measured. "I knew you would." Maria clenched her hands, fighting the tension that threatened to rise. The world around her seemed to pause for a breath, the evening air hanging heavy as the faint sound of city traffic hummed from the distance. She hadn't realized how isolated she felt, how disconnected from everything that really mattered until now. The stranger stepped closer, his presence now taking up more space in the world she had so carefully kept at arm's length. He studied her with those sharp, calculating eyes, as though gauging her every reaction, every movement. He was studying her in ways she had never been studied before, as if she were more than just the maid. "You'll have to be careful, Maria," he said, his voice low but laced with urgency. "No one here trusts easily, not even Harrison. But you already know that, don't you?" Maria nodded, her throat tight. She could see it now, the game they all played. The fragile web of alliances, the power struggles, the secrets hidden behind the polished doors of the penthouse. Harrison had always played it cool, always kept people at arm's length. But Maria knew what it was like to be ignored, to be left in the corners, to be dismissed without a second glance. And that was exactly why she could do this. No one expected anything from her. No one thought she mattered, but she did. She was beginning to believe that, slowly, as the stranger's words stirred something in her. "I'm ready," Maria whispered, her voice barely audible against the stillness of the courtyard. It wasn't just the words that left her mouth. It was the resolve behind them. "I'll do whatever it takes." The man smiled again, that quiet, knowing smile that both comforted and unsettled her in equal measure. It wasn't a smile of congratulations. It was a smile that acknowledged the weight of the path ahead, a path that Maria had no idea how to navigate. "Good," he said, as if he had been waiting for her to say those very words. "I'll be in touch soon. But remember, Maria, you're in this now, and there's no turning back." As he walked away, disappearing into the night with the same quiet grace that had marked his arrival, Maria stood frozen for a long moment. The garden was silent again, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the wind. But Maria could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She hadn't just agreed to help him expose the secrets of Harrison Brooks. She had made a pact with the unknown, a commitment to see a world she had never been privy to before. She turned toward the penthouse, the towering building looming above her like a silent witness to the game she was about to play. The staff, the polished floors, the grand marble columns. They all seemed so distant now, as if they no longer defined her place in this world. Her place had just shifted. The realization hit her harder than she expected. There was no turning back. She couldn't go back to being the maid who swept the floors and trimmed the bushes. No, she was someone else now. Someone with purpose. Someone who held a key to the world behind those gilded doors. The only question now was how far she was willing to go. As she made her way back into the penthouse, Maria's footsteps echoed in the hallway, each one more deliberate than the last. She walked past the polished floors and gleaming chandeliers, each step taking her deeper into a world she had only observed from the edges before. The sounds of her heels clicking against the marble floors were a stark contrast to the thoughts swirling in her mind. How would she do it? Where would she begin? What was it that she had to expose? She paused outside the door to the grand study where Harrison often spent hours holed up, making calls, signing deals. He wasn't there right now, but she knew his presence would return soon enough, bringing with it the same coldness and indifference she had always known. But now, as she stood there, she wondered, did he even know how close she had gotten to his secrets? How much she had learned simply by watching? Her fingers brushed the door handle, but she didn't open it. Not yet. This was only the beginning. Maria's gaze shifted to the staircase leading to the second floor, where she had always kept to herself, invisible, unnoticed. But now, that same staircase felt different, felt like a symbol of her ascent. She wasn't staying in the shadows anymore. And with that thought, Maria turned away from the door and walked toward the servants' quarters. She had a role to play, and she knew that playing it would require more than just her cleaning skills. It would require her patience, her intelligence, and her newfound understanding of the game that was being played all around her. The game had just begun. Maria spent the next few days watching, listening, observing as much as she had before, but now with a new purpose. The walls of the penthouse no longer felt like a place where she was just a shadow in the background. Every corner she swept, every room she cleaned, seemed to pulse with a new energy, a quiet undercurrent of power she hadn't noticed before. It was in the small, subtle details that Maria began to see how truly layered this world was. The hushed conversations between Harrison and his business partners, the odd phone calls that were abruptly cut off when anyone else walked into the room, the tense silences at dinner. They were all pieces to a puzzle she hadn't been allowed to touch before. Her initial hesitation had faded. Each passing day solidified the decision she had made. There was no going back now. The stranger's words echoed in her mind. You're in this now. There's no turning back. At night, when the house was quiet and the lights were dim, Maria would sit in the small utility room at the back of the penthouse, poring over the few documents she had managed to sneak a peek at during her cleaning sessions. They weren't much. Bills, receipts, scattered contracts. But they were enough to give her a glimpse into the world of wealth and business that Harrison and his partners navigated. She had begun to notice the gaps, the inconsistencies. There were financial figures that didn't add up, names she didn't recognize, transactions that seemed far too calculated to be legal. Maria had always prided herself on her attention to detail, and now it was a skill that would serve her better than it ever had. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Maria slipped into the study once again. This time it was different. She wasn't just cleaning the shelves or rearranging books. This time, she was looking for something. The soft hum of the air conditioning filled the silence as she sifted through Harrison's desk drawers, her heart beating a little faster with each passing moment. She had done this before, many times in fact, but never with the intent of finding something that mattered. Tonight, she was looking for something that would give her leverage. Her fingers moved carefully over the files, pulling out a few marked folders with names that meant little to her but piqued her curiosity. One file in particular caught her eye: Partnership Agreement, Brooks and O'Malley Enterprises. She froze. O'Malley. The name rang a bell, but she couldn't place it. Her mind raced as she flipped through the document, skimming over the figures and legal jargon. But it wasn't the numbers that stood out. It was the signature at the bottom, Harrison's, of course. But under it, in bold type, was a name she knew all too well. Victor O'Malley. Her pulse quickened. O'Malley. He was a name tied to rumors of illegal dealings, power struggles, and dark secrets. Maria had heard whispers of him before, but she never imagined his name would be tied to someone as powerful as Harrison Brooks. She quickly stuffed the file back into the drawer, making sure the room returned to its pristine condition before slipping out into the hallway. The name lingered in her mind as she made her way back to the servants' quarters. It was a link, a connection that could unravel everything. But it was just the beginning. The next few days were a blur of nervous energy and calculated actions. Maria was everywhere at once, cleaning, serving, arranging, but all the while, She was building her strategy in the back of her mind. She wasn't going to make any rash moves. This had to be done carefully, deliberately. She began to watch O'Malley. Not literally, of course, that would have been too obvious. But she started listening for his name in the conversations between the other staff members, the hushed tones of gossip that often found their way into the kitchen and the service hall. She wasn't the only one who knew his name, and like the pieces of a puzzle, they began to fit together. On the fourth night, Maria was in the kitchen preparing a tray of snacks for Harrison and his guests. As she worked, she overheard snippets of conversation between two of the butlers. Their voices were low, but Maria had learned to listen closely, to catch the details they never intended for anyone else to hear. "You think O'Malley's coming tonight?" one of the butlers asked. "Harrison's been expecting him for days." "I don't know," the other replied, "but I heard it's about the new deal. Big money's on the line. It's strange, though. I don't think Harrison's been this nervous in a long time." Maria's breath caught. She had suspected the deal was about more than just business. But the fact that it had Harrison on edge was new information, important information. And Maria knew that this was her chance. The deal, the connection, whatever was happening behind the scenes, it was finally starting to show cracks. The tension between the two butlers was palpable as the first one spoke again. "I don't care what it's about, but you know how O'Malley works. He'll get what he wants, and we'll all pay for it." Maria's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know exactly what they were talking about, but she knew enough. O'Malley was dangerous, and Harrison, for all his wealth and power, was afraid of him. She had to act quickly. Time was running out. The next morning, as Maria cleaned the upper floors, she spotted something in the corner of her eye. A small stack of papers on Harrison's desk, left unattended as usual. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure what was on them, but she knew that she had to check. This time, she didn't hesitate. She approached the desk, her heart racing as she moved the papers aside. The first page was just routine business correspondence, but the second was a detailed map of a warehouse, O'Malley's warehouse to be precise. The layout, the security plans, and a list of shipments to be delivered. Maria froze. This was it. This was the break she had been waiting for. The missing piece. She quickly scanned the rest of the document, confirming that this wasn't just about a business deal. It was about power, influence, and possibly something much darker than anyone in the penthouse was willing to admit. With trembling hands, Maria stuffed the paper into her apron and hurried out of the room, her mind racing. She had just uncovered something that could expose everything. Harrison's empire, his connection to O'Malley, and the secrets they had been hiding for years. But the question now was, what would she do with this information? The weight of the papers in Maria's apron felt heavier with each step she took away from Harrison's study. Her mind raced with the possibilities. The power in her hands, the secret she had uncovered. But with that power came an undeniable fear. What did she do now? What was she supposed to do with this knowledge? For the first time in her life, Maria was standing at a crossroads, and the decision before her seemed impossible. She could continue down the path she had always known, the one where she remained invisible, where the world she had once accepted remained unchanged. Or she could take this knowledge, take the power she now held, and tear apart the world she had worked in for so long. She moved quickly through the halls of the penthouse, her breath shallow, trying to steady her nerves. She had learned to be careful in her movements, to never attract attention. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just cleaning or serving. She was on the verge of something that could change everything. Maria reached the servants' quarters, closing the door behind her with a soft click. She took a deep breath, her mind still spinning. The warehouse plans, the shipments, the security layout. All the pieces she had uncovered fit together like a well-crafted puzzle. But what did it mean? She had never asked for any of this. She had never sought out power, never desired to be anything more than what she was. A worker, a maid, a shadow in the background of Harrison's perfect life. But now, something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just the power of the knowledge she had uncovered. It was the realization that she could change things. She could be the one to decide how this story would end. Maria walked over to the small desk in her quarters, pulling the papers from her apron. The map of the warehouse spread out before her, its intricate details seeming to mock her hesitation. The information was there, clear and damning. But how far was she willing to go? Her mind drifted back to the stranger, the man who had given her this chance, who had seen something in her that no one else had. He had made it clear, "You're in this now. There's no turning back." The truth was, she was already in too deep. There was no safe way out of this now. Harrison and his empire were built on lies, on deceit, on power that was hidden in the shadows. She had seen enough, heard enough, and felt the tension building in the air around her. But there was one question she hadn't been able to answer. Was she strong enough to tear it all down? She thought about her family, her life before this job. Back then, things had been simpler. She had known who she was and what her place in the world was. But that had changed the moment she'd stepped into this world of power and secrets. She had started to wonder if she had ever really known her place at all. Was she meant to be a silent observer, someone who simply cleaned the mess others created? Or was she meant to be something more? The question nagged at her, pulling at the very core of her being. Maria had been overlooked, discarded, invisible for most of her life. But now, the map once more. There were shipping dates, inventory lists, and security protocols, all pointing to one thing: a massive deal between Harrison and O'Malley. But what were they moving? What was so valuable that it required such careful planning and secrecy? The thought haunted her. She needed to know. But more than that, she needed to make sure she understood the full scope of what she was about to uncover. If she was going to make this decision, to step into this new world of power and manipulation, she couldn't do it blindly. Maria had a choice. She could go to Harrison, confront him with the information, demand answers, and risk everything. Or she could continue to play the role of the invisible servant, the one who cleaned up everyone's mess but never asked questions. The very thought of confronting Harrison sent a wave of fear through her chest. He was powerful. He was untouchable. But the fear was quickly replaced by something else: determination. She had nothing left to lose. She was already an outsider in this world. The people who had always overlooked her were now the ones who were vulnerable. They had no idea that she had started to see through the cracks, and Maria knew that the next move she made would be the one that changed everything. The decision didn't come easily, but it came with clarity. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to be invisible. She was going to find out everything she could about the deal, about O'Malley's involvement, about what was really at stake. And once she had the truth, she would decide what to do with it. But there was one thing Maria knew for sure. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't a servant. She was a player in a game that had always been out of reach, and she was ready to play it. The following days were a blur of quiet moments, each one filled with an unbearable weight. Maria kept her head down, as always, moving through the halls of the penthouse with the same practiced routine she had perfected over the years. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. The walls of the house that once felt like a protective shell now felt like a cage. A cage that she was beginning to understand, one brick at a time. She had spent hours that night, poring over the details of the warehouse map, the financial records, the confidential documents she had stolen from Harrison's study. Every small detail, every name, every figure, every date seemed to tie back to something bigger. The shipments, the security protocols, the hidden warehouses in places Maria had only heard of in whispers. It all pointed to something that felt darker, more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She was in too deep. There was no turning back now. Maria's thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her phone vibrating in her pocket. She pulled it out quickly, not expecting anything important. It was a message from the stranger, the man who had set this entire course in motion. She hadn't heard from him in days, and the silence had left her with a growing sense of unease. The message was simple, almost cryptic. The moment of truth is approaching. Do you know what's at stake? Maria stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She had suspected something like this was coming, but she hadn't expected the weight of the message to hit her so hard. The moment of truth. What did he mean? Did he know what she had uncovered? Was he telling her that she needed to act now, before it was too late? Maria stood still in the hallway, the phone still gripped tightly in her hand. Her mind raced. She could feel the walls closing in around her. The penthouse that had once been a place of luxury now felt like a place of confinement. A place where secrets festered and people were too busy hiding to notice the truth. Her thoughts shifted back to the warehouse, to O'Malley, to Harrison's carefully crafted empire of power. The realization was slow, creeping up on her like the quiet hum of an alarm she had ignored for too long. O'Malley wasn't just a business partner. He was part of something larger, something that involved money, power, and corruption on a scale Maria hadn't fully understood until now. And Harrison? He wasn't just playing the game. He was the game. She couldn't keep doing this. She couldn't stay in the shadows any longer. Too scared to confront the truth. Too frightened to see the full picture. The secret connections between Harrison and O'Malley had to come to light. Maria had to take action. But how? Her eyes fell to the phone once again. Do you know what's at stake? The question lingered in her mind, and she realized that the stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about survival. Her survival. The man's message was a reminder that she was already a part of something larger, something dangerous, and that the moment to act had arrived. Maria turned toward the stairs leading up to the second floor. The house felt different now, as if it were no longer her world. The halls felt narrow, oppressive, and the sharp scent of luxury no longer seemed comforting. Each step she took felt heavier, each breath more labored, as though the house itself was trying to keep her from moving forward. She had to act, and she had to act fast. The stranger's message was a warning, but it was also a call to arms. The moment of truth had arrived. At the top of the stairs, Maria hesitated for a moment, standing before Harrison's office. It was his world behind that door, a world of polished suits, of meetings with powerful people, of decisions made that affected the lives of many. But it was also a world of lies. She knew now that nothing in this house was as it seemed. And Harrison, he wasn't the untouchable figure she had once believed him to be. He was just a man hiding behind his wealth, trying to keep everything together. But that was the problem. The cracks were showing, and Maria had the power to expose them. Her hand reached for the door handle, but she stopped just short of turning it. Was she ready for this? Was she ready to change everything? To expose the dark secrets that had been carefully hidden? The answer came quickly. She had no choice. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She couldn't stay invisible. Not now. Not after what she had seen. With a deep breath, Maria pushed open the door and stepped inside. The office was dimly lit, the only light coming from the desk lamp that sat on Harrison's immaculate desk. The papers were neatly arranged, the chair pushed back just slightly as though it had been abandoned in a hurry. Maria's heart thudded in her chest as she crossed the room to the desk, her eyes scanning the piles of documents. Files, contracts, reports. The world that had been carefully built around Harrison Brooks felt so fragile now, so easy to destroy. She quickly rifled through the papers, her fingers trembling. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second making her feel more vulnerable, more exposed. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She needed something that would connect Harrison and O'Malley. Something more than just the whispers she had overheard. Something solid, something irrefutable. Her hand brushed against a thick folder, its cover stamped with a name she had seen before. Brooks and O'Malley Enterprises. Confidential. Maria's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was the moment. She flipped open the folder, scanning through the documents. The contracts, the shipping plans, the names, it was all there, laid out in black and white. The connections between Harrison and O'Malley were more than just business. They were personal, intricate, and damning. This was more than a partnership. This was a network of corruption that went deeper than Maria had ever imagined. But just as quickly as she realized the full extent of what she had uncovered, the door to the office creaked open. Maria's heart skipped a beat as the door creaked open, the sound sharp and unsettling in the otherwise quiet office. She froze, every muscle tensing as the figure in the doorway materialized. casting a shadow across the dimly lit room. Her pulse quickened, her breath shallow. "Harrison," she said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. Her voice was steady, but beneath it, there was an undercurrent of something she hadn't expected to feel: fear. Harrison stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the faint light from the hallway. His eyes narrowed as they fell on Maria, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The air seemed to thicken, each second stretching into eternity as he took in the sight of her standing by his desk, his most private documents in hand. "What are you doing in here?" His voice was calm, almost too calm, as though he already knew the answer. But the underlying tension in his tone betrayed him. Maria felt a chill settle over her as she stood there, caught in the act. For a brief moment, she wondered if she should make a run for it, if she should flee from the world she had just stepped into. But that thought was quickly pushed aside. She had already made her choice, and there was no going back now. "I was just looking for something," Maria said, her voice more forceful than she had intended. "I found something. Something that I think you didn't want me to see." Harrison stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The sound was final, a door closing on whatever innocence Maria had left. His eyes remained fixed on her, calculating, searching. But there was no anger in his gaze, just a cold, unsettling calm. "What did you find, Maria?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper, as if trying to coax the truth from her. "And why are you in my office, of all places?" She didn't answer him right away. She couldn't. The words were stuck in her throat, thick with everything she had learned over the past few days. The connections, the lies, the power that had been hidden from her for so long. But now, with Harrison standing in front of her, Maria knew that this wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about confronting him, about finally forcing him to face the person she had become. "Your business dealings with O'Malley," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I found the map, the security plans. I know about the warehouse, the shipments, and the connections you've been hiding." For a brief moment, Harrison didn't respond. He simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You think you know something, Maria?" he said, his voice low, almost contemplative. "But what you don't understand is that the things you've found, they don't matter. You're just a maid. You're in over your head." His words hit her like a slap, but Maria refused to let them break her. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, dismissed. But this was different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't the maid who cleaned the floors or fetched the coffee. She was the one who held the truth in her hands, the one who had seen the cracks in his empire. And she wasn't backing down. "I'm not just a maid," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm the one who's going to expose everything. You think you can control everything around here, Harrison, but you can't. You've already lost." Harrison's eyes darkened, a flicker of something dangerous, passing across his face. He took another step toward her, his presence suddenly overwhelming. Maria felt a surge of panic, but she didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not now. "Do you know what you're talking about, Maria?" His voice was cold, but there was an edge to it now, a barely contained anger. "You think you can bring me down? You think you know how this works? You're playing a game you don't understand. And you're going to regret this." Maria's heart raced as the tension between them thickened, but she stood her ground. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let Harrison intimidate her. He might be the one with the money, the power, the connections, but she had something he didn't: the truth. "No, Harrison," she said, her voice steady. "You're the one who's going to regret underestimating me. You've been hiding behind your wealth, your empire, but it's all a lie, and I'm going to expose it." For a moment, there was silence between them. Harrison's expression remained unreadable, his cold gaze never leaving her. Maria could feel the weight of the confrontation, the gravity of the moment. This was no longer just about her job or the things she had uncovered. This was about power and who was going to hold it. But then, unexpectedly, Harrison did something that stunned her. He smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even a genuine smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen everything before, who had been to the edge and back, and knew exactly how to manipulate the game. "You have no idea what you're up against," he said, his voice soft, almost pitying. "You think you can take me down? You think this little secret you've uncovered will make a difference? Maria, you're nothing. You're just a maid." His words hit her like a punch, but Maria refused to let them land. She had heard it all before, the dismissal, the belittling. But this time it didn't matter. This time she wasn't backing down. She had come too far. "I'm not nothing," she said, her voice unwavering. "And you're not as untouchable as you think." Harrison's smile faded, and for the first time, Maria saw a flicker of something real in his eyes. It wasn't fear exactly, but it was something close. It was a realization that he might have underestimated her, just as everyone else had before. Maria took a deep breath, her heart still racing, but a quiet sense of victory spreading through her. She had made her move. She had confronted him, and now there was no turning back. Maria walked away from Harrison's office with her heart still pounding in her chest, the remnants of their confrontation echoing in her ears. She had faced him, spoken the words she had held back for so long, and felt a surge of power that was almost intoxicating. But now, as she made her way through the long hallways of the penthouse, a sense of unease settled in. The game she had stepped into was no longer a quiet rebellion. It was war. Her hands were still trembling, though she tried to steady them. The weight of the papers she had uncovered, the evidence of Harrison's hidden world of corruption and secrets, was heavy in her mind. What had once been a quiet curiosity now felt like a burden. This wasn't just about exposing a lie anymore. This was about survival, her survival. She couldn't shake the image of Harrison's face when she had confronted him, the flicker of something cold and calculating in his eyes. It wasn't fear, not in the way she had expected, but there was something else there, something more dangerous. Maria realized then that the path she had chosen wasn't just risky, it was perilous. Harrison would do whatever it took to protect his empire, and if that meant destroying her, he wouldn't hesitate. She paused in front of the kitchen door, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of the glass. She didn't recognize herself in that moment. The woman who had quietly cleaned the floors and tended to the garden was gone. In her place stood someone who had already stepped into the shadows of the world she had never known. A world of wealth, lies, and power that was now as much hers as it was Harrison's. But with that power came a price. The weight of what she had done pressed heavily on her shoulders. She had revealed herself. She had exposed her hand. And now she had to be ready for the consequences. A sharp knock at the kitchen door startled her, pulling her from her thoughts. Before she could react, the door opened, and the housekeeper, Lucy, stepped inside. The older woman's expression was one of mild concern, but there was something else in her eyes, something Maria couldn't quite place. "Maria," Lucy said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." Maria's heart skipped. She had known this moment was coming. The housekeeper had been watching her for days, and Maria had no doubt that Lucy had noticed the change in her behavior, the way she had started acting differently, more aware of her surroundings, the way she had begun to listen, to question, to observe. "What's going on, Lucy?" Maria asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the tension building in her chest. The older woman stepped closer, glancing quickly over her shoulder as if to make sure no one else was listening. "I know what you've been doing," Lucy said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "You've been digging, haven't you? You've found things. Things you shouldn't have." Maria's stomach churned. How much did Lucy know? How much had she seen? Her mind raced, but she didn't speak. She couldn't. Lucy's gaze softened, and she stepped even closer. "It's dangerous, Maria. You're playing with fire. You think Harrison doesn't know? You think O'Malley doesn't know? You're a pawn in their game, and if you're not careful, you'll be the one who gets burned." Maria felt a cold chill run through her. This wasn't the warning she had expected. She had thought that Lucy, like the rest of the staff, was simply another cog in the machine. But now, as the older woman's eyes locked onto hers, Maria realized that Lucy wasn't just a housekeeper. She was a part of something much larger, a thread in a web that Maria had only just begun to understand. "Who are you working for?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Lucy sighed, her shoulders slumping as if she had been carrying a weight far heavier than the years of service she had put in at the penthouse. "I've been watching you, Maria. I've been watching how you've been asking questions, how you've been looking at things you shouldn't. And I can see it. I see what you're trying to do." Maria's breath caught in her throat. Could it be possible? Had Lucy been watching her all along, waiting for the right moment to reveal herself? But why? Why? Maria asked, her voice barely a whisper. Lucy's gaze softened once more, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and sadness. "Because I've been where you are. I've seen it all before. You think you can change things, that you can expose the truth. But you're wrong. You're gonna get caught up in something you can't control. Harrison and O'Malley don't just rule this house. They rule everything. And when they decide to shut something down, they do it with an iron fist." Maria took a step back, her head spinning. It was one thing to confront Harrison. It was one thing to believe she could bring down the empire. But now, faced with the reality that someone like Lucy, someone who had been in this world far longer than she had, was telling her to stop, Maria realized just how dangerous this was. But it was too late for her to turn back. The pieces were in place. The truth was already out there, and now there was no going back. "I can't stop now," Maria said, her voice firm. "I've come too far." Lucy's face hardened for the briefest moment, and for the first time, Maria saw a flicker of something darker in her eyes. "You don't have a choice," she said, her voice low. "You may think you're in control, but trust me, you're not. Harrison won't let you get away with this. And O'Malley? He's even worse." Maria swallowed hard, the weight of Lucy's words settling in her gut. "But the Phi," her voice unwavering. "I didn't come this far to turn back now." Lucy looked at her one last time, her eyes filled with something Maria couldn't read: resignation, fear, maybe even a hint of admiration. But whatever it was, it didn't matter. Maria had made her choice. She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Maria woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand, its shrill tones slicing through the thick silence of the early morning. The dim light from the window cast shadows across the room, the city outside still shrouded in the soft, peaceful haze of dawn. But for Maria, there was no peace. Not anymore. Her hand reached instinctively for the phone, the weight of the decision she had made still heavy on her chest. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from the stranger, the one who had set this whole thing in motion, who had watched her and given her the push she needed. He had been the catalyst. But now everything was changing. "They know. It's time." Her breath caught. The words were simple, but they carried an undeniable weight. They know. Harrison and O'Malley. They had figured it out. They knew Maria had been poking around, searching for the truth. They knew she had crossed a line. Maria tossed the phone aside, her pulse quickening. The quiet of the morning was gone, replaced by the loud thrum of urgency that filled her mind. She had gone too far. She had already exposed the cracks, and now the walls were closing in. The house was still silent as she slipped out of bed, the cold floors pressing against her bare feet as she moved toward the mirror. Her reflection looked back at her, a woman caught between two worlds. One foot still grounded in the life she had lived, cleaning floors and serving the powerful, while the other was stepping boldly into the world of secrets and lies. A world where the truth was currency, and survival meant knowing when to fight and when to run. But there was no running now. Not after everything that had happened. Maria dressed quickly, her hands moving with practiced precision as she prepared herself for what was coming. She had been waiting for this moment, unknowingly, since the day she had walked into Harrison's world. She had seen the cracks, heard the whispers, and felt the shift within herself. She had spent her life in the background, but now she was front and center. a key player in a game she had never fully understood until now. Her phone buzzed again. "Don't wait. They'll be here soon. Do what you have to do." The message was cryptic, but Maria knew exactly what it meant. The stranger had prepared her. The moment of truth had arrived, and the clock was ticking. If she didn't act now, if she didn't expose what she had uncovered, there would be no going back. They would find her, silence her, and erase her from this world. Just another nameless face among the forgotten. She could feel the weight of the documents she had found in Harrison's office pressing against her chest as she left her quarters. The map of the warehouse, the contracts, the evidence of the dark dealings between Harrison and O'Malley. All of it was out there now, in the open, and all Maria had to do was take the final step. But what would that step be? Maria paused in front of the door to the penthouse, her hand resting on the cool metal handle. She could feel the world outside waiting for her. The dangers, the unknowns, the enemies she hadn't yet identified. She could hear Harrison's voice in her head, cold and calculating, dismissing her every step of the way. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had been afraid her entire life. Afraid of being invisible, of being dismissed, of never being seen. But now she was the one holding the power, and she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. She pushed open the door and stepped into the hallway, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet, and Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She didn't know exactly what it was, but she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. The tension was thick in the air. As she moved down the hallway, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. The name on the screen made her pause. It was Harrison. Her heart skipped. She didn't know what he wanted, but she knew this was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment where everything would change. She picked up the phone, her hand shaking slightly. "Maria." Harrison's voice was cool, almost amused, but there was an edge to it. "I know what you've been doing. I know what you've uncovered." Maria swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "You can't hide it anymore. I've seen the truth." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long stretch of silence that made her skin crawl. And then Harrison spoke again, his voice cold, calculating. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Maria. You're a pawn. You've always been a pawn. And you think you can bring me down? You think you can expose me? You're wrong. You're in over your head." Maria's fingers tightened around the phone. She could hear the power in his words, the confidence that he believed he was untouchable. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of O'Malley, not of any of them. "I'm not backing down," she said, her voice steady. "I know what you've been hiding, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth." A sharp laugh echoed from the other end of the line. "You think anyone will listen to you? You think you can just waltz into my world and take it down? You have no idea what you're up against." Maria took a deep breath, the fire inside her burning brighter than ever. She wasn't just talking to Harrison anymore. She was talking to everyone who had ever underestimated her, to everyone who had ever thought she would remain in the background. "I know exactly what I'm up against," she said, her voice growing stronger. "And I'm ready." The line went dead. Maria stood still for a moment, the silence of the penthouse swallowing her whole. But in that silence, she knew something had changed. She wasn't a pawn anymore. She was a player. And no one, not Harrison, not O'Malley, not anyone, could take that away from her. She turned and walked down the hallway, each step filled with purpose. The game had just begun, and she was ready to win. Maria stood at the threshold of the penthouse, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts, but her body still, grounded in the moment. The soft hum of the city outside was a distant reminder of the world that continued to turn, unaware of the battle that was unfolding in the high-rise above. Her hand rested against the cool doorframe, her gaze fixed on the world beyond. The bright lights of the city that never slept, the endless horizon of possibilities stretching out before her. For so long, she had lived in the shadows, a silent observer of the world she had never been a part of. But now, as she took a deep breath, something inside her shifted. The weight of the choices she had made, of the path she had chosen, no longer felt like a burden, felt like freedom. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just a servant who quietly cleaned the marble floors and arranged the flowers in the corner. She was a woman who had faced the truth, a woman who had stepped into a world of power and secrets and found her place in it. For the first time in her life, Maria knew that she was no longer invisible. The door creaked behind her, and Maria turned to find herself looking at the reflection in the glass. She saw a woman she didn't recognize at first. The timid, quiet maid had vanished. In her place stood someone new, someone strong, someone who had the power to change the course of her life. Her reflection wasn't just the image of a worker anymore. It was the image of someone who had taken control of her own story, who had written her own fate with each small, decisive action she had taken. There were still obstacles ahead. There were still dangers lurking in the shadows. But Maria was ready. She had come too far to stop now. With a steady breath, she stepped away from the mirror and moved toward the stairs that led to the penthouse's grand hall. The echoes of her footsteps on the polished floors felt different now. Each step was a declaration, a small victory over the past she had left behind. The walls of the penthouse no longer seemed imposing. They felt like a challenge she was ready to face head-on. The soft chime of the elevator interrupted her thoughts, and she paused, glancing toward the doors. She didn't know who would emerge from it. Another one of Harrison's business partners, another anonymous face in the crowd. But this time it didn't matter. She was no longer the invisible maid. She wasn't anyone's pawn. She was the one in control now. As the elevator doors opened, Maria felt her heart beat with an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone, not Harrison, not O'Malley, not anyone, push her back into the corners of this world. She could feel the shift within herself, the slow, steady realization that this was the moment she had been waiting for her entire life. To be seen, to be heard, to have a voice that mattered. The doors opened completely, and Maria stepped into the hall with a quiet confidence. Her head held high, her gaze steady and unbroken. The weight of everything that had happened, the secrets, the lies, the power struggles, still hung heavy in the air. But Maria wasn't afraid of it anymore. She had come too far to turn back. In this moment, Maria knew that whatever came next, she was ready. Ready to expose the truth. Ready to take back her power. Ready to make them see her for who she truly was.